So the first thing I want to do at the start of every painting session is to go in and check my drawing and see if there are any corrections that I need to make before I jump further into the painting process. So as I look at my still life setup and I look at my painting, I see a couple of things. They're not huge, but I see a couple of things that I would like to correct, and now is really the best time to do that. This is the third painting session on this painting. We started work, we had the underpainting done and dry, and then started work on the second stage of the painting of building up a little bit more paint on the surface and starting to blend. Also, if you remember, the underpainting was done in 4 values, black, white, and 2 gray values. We're now going to expand to use all 9 of the values that we've mixed in our value scale, and I have them here on my palette ready to go. And I also have on the left side of my painting, I have my 9-box value scale. How that helps me is that allows me to look at the setup and kind of, if I squint my eyes at the setup, I can start to kind of assign values from this value scale onto the objects themselves. So in other words, I can look at the form shadow on my white sphere and see that it sits in this 3rd to 4th box here, probably in between those two. So that's where I'm going to get some blending that's going to happen. It also, having this value scale here, also serves the purpose of making sure that I am really trying to stretch my value scale from my darkest dark to my lightest light, and not letting the whole painting exist in these middle values, which is what sometimes can happen when you start blending. So to make my first correction, so the way that I'm going to correct that drawing, instead of trying to outline again the contour of this sphere that I feel like is incorrectly drawn, I'm going to look at where I just want to shave a little bit off here. So I'm going to take, maybe with my small filbert instead of my round, so I'm going to look at the value of this negative space in between the large sphere and the small sphere. That's negative space is the space that the term we use to refer to the space in between our primary objects here. So what I'm going to do to adjust the contour or the edge of this sphere is I'm going to take some of that dark value, and if I look up at my setup over here, it's very dark, but I don't think it's my blackest black. So I'm going to go with that second value in on my value scale here, and I'm going to take that value and I'm going to paint the background or the negative space and carve off the edge. Just bring that edge in just a little bit by painting over it with my background, my negative space value. So that makes it easier sometimes to change the contour of something rather than trying to paint another outline. Just use that negative space edge to come over and adjust that contour. And I'll do a little bit here, down the side here. And I think that's got it pretty well. So I feel pretty good about that. Now, if you remember in class on Thursday, I worked on these 2 white spheres, adding a little more paint to them, getting another layer of paint. Our building process is we're building those light values. We're building one value on top of the next as I go through the painting. So if I look carefully at my still life setup, my light is coming from the left. So this black background, while it's all the same color or value. But it feels a little bit lighter over here because that's closer to the light. This side is receiving the light as it comes across this way. So if I look at my value scale, I think that area is sort of in my third value block from my darkest dark. And remember, we talked a little bit about using your brush strokes to describe the surface that you are attempting to imitate. Okay, we want to think about if that wall or that black poster board is flat, how do we best describe that flat surface? And so I think about using vertical or horizontal brush strokes. Down here, where it approaches the bottom edge of my background, I want to intensify that value. It doesn't actually change and get darker, but it appears to get darker because of the amount of contrast between that black background and the white sphere. Okay, so this is where we're making decisions as artists. How do I recreate that sense of this fairly intense contrast between the black surface and the white surface? I want to really play that up, especially here between, in this little area of negative space between these two white spheres. That's where there is some drama, visual drama in the painting. So I want to intensify that value. I'm going to go get a little bit darker, not quite to my darkest dark. And then where I want that value to blend out into the light area, I'm just going to cross-hatch. If you remember cross-hatching from your drawing class, I'm just going to cross-hatch my brush strokes and let them kind of gradually, that darker value gradually blend out into that slightly lighter value that I had already applied in the top left-hand corner. Okay, so I think I'm going to take that value all the way across the right side of the painting, again paying attention to contrast. So there's a fair amount of contrast here between the top of that large sphere and the background. Again, letting it sort of blend across, cross-hatching my paint. So at this point, I really don't see any of my original underpainting, my toning of the canvas coming through. We want to make sure, even though I'm working pretty lean still at this point, I want to make sure that I'm covering my toned canvas and my underpainting. It gets really quite dark here, and there's a lost edge where the cast shadow on the wall and the cast shadow on this small egg kind of blend together. So I'm going to come in with my dark value here. That's a fairly hard edge at the edge of this cast shadow. It gets a little softer as it comes out to the right edge of the picture plane. But there's a pretty dramatic shift between this middle gray and our dark middle gray and the black of the cast shadow. So I'm going to let that just blend down over the edge of that egg because it's kind of tucked back behind in that shadow. Now I'm going to come back with my slightly lighter background value. Mix a little bit here of my third and fourth dark value together so it doesn't get too intensely dark in that background, because I want to see the difference between those dark values, the cast shadow and the dark of the wall. And I'm going to blend over that edge just slightly. It's a fairly sudden shift, but it's not like a razor sharp shift between here and here. Now remember, the cast shadow is darkest right underneath the object that is casting the shadow. So I've got a really dark shadow here right underneath the egg and right underneath the sphere. That kind of helps to make those objects really sit on the surface. Then I've got my very dark cast shadow right underneath this egg that I had painted on Thursday. So I've got that cast shadow there, and you'll see that really dark cast shadow here and here, and then there's this sort of triangle where the two cast shadows overlap each other. Now, with my lighter value working on the ground plane, I want to really look at the value here in this ground plane, and then also really look at the shape of those cast shadows so that I get them correct. I think this needs a little bit of correction on the drawing here. And I want to get that value right. The value of the cast shadow, even though, the value of the ground plane surface, even though there's light hitting it directly, it is a different color, therefore a different value from these two spheres. It's a little bit darker. So when I put that, oops, I need to get a different brush so that it's nice and clean. And I'm going to look at where that ground plane appears to be lighter and where it appears to be slightly darker. So again, thinking about my brush strokes. So the light is coming from this direction. So I feel a fair amount of light here on the left side of the ground plane, but where it goes up underneath and behind this sphere, it appears to be darker. I don't think it is darker, but it appears to be darker because it's right next to something that's white. So we'll keep sort of reiterating that over and over again. All your values and your color are relative to the things next to them when we talk about the painting.